Star Citizen's development has been slow and painful. It's almost impossible to not know this if you've been following the game. Throughout the years, many features get discussed, introduced, and shown off only to then disappear for years. It's reasonable to think maybe these features have been killed, but oftentimes there are other reasons for their absence. Often, especially recently, these features do eventually pop back up after being forgotten. Some call this feature creep, others simply celebrate their return after a long dead silence. Today, in my latest Red Take, released exclusively to supporters in July, we'll take a look at several features that have suffered from what I like to call the hover mode effect. Why were they seemingly forgotten, and what has brought or will soon bring them back to our hands? This is a story of, I assume, how many games are developed, and can hopefully set some examples for why you shouldn't give up hope on that feature you've been waiting for. And this list is not exhaustive. There are quite a few examples of this, so let me know which features you've noticed coming back into the limelight in the comments below. If you'd like to see these videos as soon as they are released, you can become a supporter here or on Patreon to help this channel continue and receive exclusive videos every month, live podcast viewings every week, and your referral code in our referral code randomizer down in the description. Or you can just sit back and relax. For all those who have chosen to do so, thank you for supporting my Tomato Talks. Back when the new Volt weapons were introduced to us in 2021, there were some other crucial FPS items also going through production. These were the full-size tractor beam delivered in 3.21, the medical tool delivered in 3.15, the multi-tool attachments that over the course of the years followed the multi-tool in 3.12, the salvage tool which was released in 3.18, and the cutting tool which is still actually not out. At the time, we also saw some work on breaching charges, though we still don't have those yet. These tools took a lot of the FPS team's efforts and time throughout that period. You'll notice this looking back at Star Citizen monthly reports throughout 2021 and 2022, with various mentions of these tools while both the Volt Parallax rifle and the Ultiflex Novia crossbow progressed through advanced stages of art, but they didn't see any updates after that. The reason for that is kinda easy to find. Let's look at the Squadron 42 monthly reports simultaneously. Here you'll see not just the Volt weapons getting updates, but other items we know next to nothing about, and a few that we do know now that we've seen Squadron 42. Prior to this, though, there are a lot of missing months in both of these reports, with basically one update of note in February as the sole update between June of 2021 and June of 2022. That's an entire year. During that time, I've been informed that the team was working almost solely on Squadron 42 weapons, as well as small updates here and there for Star Citizen. And you can see the effect of this, as we were seeing regular weapon additions to Star Citizen in virtually every single update up until 3.12 in 2020. After which we only saw a single ship weapon added and no new FPS weapons for the next 4 years. The FPS weapons situation, spotlighted by these Volt weapons, is just one example of how much Squadron 42's development disrupted and slowed down Star Citizen. An entire video on its own to be sure, but a big part of the question, why is Star Citizen taking so long? While most of the focus was on an entirely different game, Star Citizen has seen many features like this that took the back seat these last few years. Now we get to see if those teams will actually start getting back to regular additions in the game most players currently care about. The Hurston security armor is another interesting story. This piece of armor was introduced back in the summer of 2018, way back, when Sandy Gardner was still co-hosting Around the Verse. This armor was introduced this one time, then I think possibly misrepresented at CitizenCon that same year.
Yes, so that is one of the Hurston security guards, I think.
And then essentially it disappeared for 3.5 years before suddenly showing up as upcoming armor. Now, it's not like this had been forgotten about and was then coming back, but it always struck me as a clear example of features that just get shoved aside until the time is right. It's not the first time it's happened, and I kinda expect the same thing to happen with this supposed Terra concept armor someday as well. We saw this a few years ago, and while these assets might be repurposed to something else, I do think we'll see something like this pop back up once we get there. I couldn't tell you why this Hurston security armor took so long, but it likely wasn't worth the effort to add a fancy new armor into the PU for some security folks, at least for a little while. And the big one. Back in Alpha 3.6 in 2019, CIG made a move to add depth to atmospheric flight. This move was called hover mode. It was a controversial addition for various reasons, but ultimately CIG decided it was the wrong feature for the job.
It was the right idea with not quite the right implementation.
Now, as you'll surely see in the comments, hover mode was amazing and did everything it needed to. It was perfect. We just needed to get better. But hover mode was a similar addition to master modes, an artificial limitation placed on ships at an arbitrary point to force a specific behavior in players. Many say this should be brought back. It creates a new dynamic to atmospheric flight that separates good pilots from the great, and it adds some more variety to the game. It also highlights specific ship strengths like VTOL and aerodynamics. The problem with this is all of these things can't be solved by one single solution for every ship. And we'll get to that in a minute. But since the feature has been removed, players, myself included, have clamored for its return or something similar. And while many think it is gone for good, a new version of hover mode has been slowly being built in different game systems for years. First, you can see John Crew describing how it will work via the heat system and flight control surfaces back in 2021.
Heat, we don't really use heat at the moment because the way heat works in our game is not how we want it to work long term, and this is something with a resource system that is being entirely redone. But for ships like a Gladius, as well as needing that control surface to keep up in the air, like if you're not going fast, those thrusters can start overheating as a penalty, because in reality, you could just upend your Gladius like that and balance it on its main thrusters. But because they're powerful enough to do that, so they should be powerful enough to do that, but they're going to be working so hard that heat is going to build up, and we can cause intentional problems doing it that way.
And now more recently, you can hear Yogi Klatt reference the functionality at CitizenCon just last year.
Bring down the speed more and more until you're reaching stall speed, which is about now, and then the thrusters will kick in and catch you. That means, however, you are now in a state that the thrusters don't like, right? So at the moment we have turned this up, but in the future you will not be able to hold this for long.
At some point, the idea that all ships will be limited in some way by their aerodynamic shape and their thruster configuration will have an impact on players and continue to specialize the role of actually piloting ships, especially big ones. The company has just decided that this is a function that needs to be handled systemically, rather than by some arbitrary point. It should be handled by the heat your ship creates when it can't rely on aerodynamics for flight, which is why this space game has a lot of non-space looking ships. This is a good reminder of how during development, certain solutions may not fit even if they do get the job done, but it doesn't mean the functionality is done for good. Oftentimes, things need to be tried, understood, and restructured. Some may see this as a problem of game development. It certainly slows things down, but as you can see from the reaction of master modes, many will tell the company, go back and figure it out rather than forcing something to work. Unfortunately, this new version of hover mode couldn't really exist until the new resource management system made heat management a more player-facing thing. So once engineering is here, this is likely something we'll start hearing more about again. The map system has been shown off in various concepts and designs over the years. One of my favorite is this interior map demo that looked very plain back then, but translated pretty well to the system that we've gotten. While it showed up here in 2019, the interior map app would remain basically unseen all the way up until CitizenCon of 2023, besides a brief visual preview in 2022. And a similar story goes for the HUD and the minimap. While we're talking about UI, this Aegis HUD was presented as a previs target back in 2021, and while it was phased out shortly before CitizenCon 2022, as you can see here.
So just to call out, that's going to be the old HUD.
Yeah, that is the old HUD. That's too busy.
The ideas ended up making it into the game this year. The main reason for these UI items taking so long was the building blocks tool that CIG created to build the items. CIG needed to create a new tool in their game engine that could build the UI they needed and allow those UI to be changed across the game. This self-published tool took a while to make, and we saw the various developments in it over time as it was updated to work throughout the company. UI slowly started to get more feature-rich and reliable, and while there are still problems to this day, even with the new map that we have gotten, what we see now is a far cry from the Flash-based UI we've been using. Building up this system, then applying it to 3D shapes, took several years to do, and even then, most efforts were likely focused on implementing these changes to Squadron 42 first anyways. So while it may seem like some of the UI that they've discussed over the years just will never get added, they've hopefully reached a better place to deliver on those concepts now, as we're starting to see with some of the new functionality. Engineering as a feature was introduced in 2021, though the actual mechanic has been planned since 2013. Components in ships have been a thing as long as I can remember, and for years, players were told these components would be really what matters about your ship rather than just the hull. What would actually take damage from weapons, what you could customize and play with to control your ship and specialize your role. We saw subcomponents in development, power systems were shown off in interaction zoos, providing a look at how this new, updated resource pipe system could work. Components became physicalized so we could interact with them, and eventually, small demos started to appear as the gameplay took more shape. And for many who didn't catch some of these updates, it felt a bit like components, resource management, and the complexity of ships wasn't moving forward. Now with the gameplay available to us in Arena Commander, we're getting a better idea of how it all works, but even what we see there isn't the true feature. Resource management is meant to give us control over gravity, power, lights, data transmission, and even oxygen supply and life support, letting you vent rooms to stop fires or your enemies. It's a big underlying part of the game, and it's not just limited to ships. CIG has already started teasing this fact by showing us potential gameplay around space stations, outposts, and cities. But for this system to really make sense and function, I think it was crucial a good subset of these locations could accommodate them for testing. From security systems to mining structures, the team has to figure out how to tie everything into power systems, including the bases you build, the armor you wear, or even the gun battery you're carrying around. The story of why this system took such a long time to launch and continues to take a while, because there are still plenty of aspects of it we can't see, may end up being never known by us until maybe NoClip can make a nice documentary after the fact. But it remains to be seen if it is justified with how much it affects the actual game. Physical interaction is a fun one. It's not very in your face, but it is something that is talked about quite a lot amongst those who wanted to see Star Citizen stay hardcore. I was wondering if this was still a feature as it had been so long since we had seen an update on it, but last CitizenCon we were treated to quite a few showcases of physical interaction with wheels, doors, buttons, and other items. It was pointed out as being an important part of the experience, tying you into the scene more viscerally, which was a big part of the early vision of the game as well. Pressing buttons in the cockpit for startup was a big desire of many, and a lot of effort has been put into physicalizing so much of this game, it would have been disappointing to not see this deeply integrated into the game. Now it is a for sure feature coming back to the game at some point. It was a feature that I was pretty unsure about for a while, and a reminder that even the little things are still on the to-do list even if we don't hear about them for years. Though I'm still holding judgment to see just how far this feature goes, especially when it comes to things like looting and picking up items in the open. Wear and tear is something we've experienced in a variety of disjointed ways. It was introduced to the game all the way back in 2018 in the 3.3 update, but it hasn't even been noticed by most. Sometimes you'll see a torque imbalance or a thruster throwing off misfires, but between the lack of financial incentive and the unnoticeable gameplay hindrance from the feature, most players can't be bothered to upkeep their ships besides just blowing it up and claiming it at the insurance kiosk. But we are in a new era of development, and the player-facing features are rolling in. Weapon degradation is coming to the game due to, of course, the completion of the feature in Squadron 42. And player degradation is also a thing with injuries, the death of a spaceman system, and even hygiene mechanics. So while we've gotten used to a feature that was seemingly added and forgotten, that was only an alpha implementation. The real system, which will reflect the environment you've been in and the actions you've taken with your belongings, is very much on the way. This, of course, will be heavily tied into the repair profession and gameplay, engineering and maintenance on ships and in bases, and the crafting system that has only just started to be talked about. There are many features like these I've listed here. Did you know the change of seasons and planets has been discussed due to the facts that planets will eventually orbit around their stars? The lofty goals of the quantum simulation, or star sim as they might call it, haven't gone away either. Yes, they've taken a long time to appear after a lot of talking, something I covered earlier this year, but the overall design is still in the works. Atmospheric decompression, animated helmets, AI flying ships around locations, hacking systems, naming your ships, different ammo types and armor specialization, realistic sound effects. alternative paths into and out of areas for smuggling, even the recent introduction of modularity to ships. And don't forget the water effects from ships that Chris touted as coming at some point all the way back in 2017, which are just now making it into the game.
When we get low enough, we want to have the thing where the wake from the ship creates waves. No, that's not in yet, but we will be doing that at some point.
These may be features new players aren't aware of, or that veteran followers thought were left behind, but for various reasons we're starting to see conversation and development around these features pick up again. While I don't know the ins and outs of other games in development, I wouldn't be surprised if games like Elder Scrolls 6, GTA 6, or the next Cyberpunk game go through phases like this. We simply just don't get to see it or hear about it. And it's a big part of why I originally started covering this game particularly. The ebb and flow of development is frustrating, but it interests me to no end to see the challenges and how they are overcome, or maybe not so much. Either way, I wanted to highlight a few of these features that I've seen believed to be forgotten or ditched that have either started to pop back up, made it into the game, or are still discussed rarely as being in development. There's so much going on here, and it can be easy to miss these occurrences. I hope it was informative and maybe shed some light on a feature or two you've been waiting for. And if you want to follow the development of these features and the game in general, you can subscribe to this channel. This is a supporter exclusive video released in July and made available publicly later in the year. If you'd like access to videos like this that dive deeper into the development, history, and dilemmas of Star Citizen at a higher level of quality, you can join here or on Patreon and receive other perks like live podcast viewings and a place in our referral code randomizer in the description of each video. We offer these services as a thank you to our supporters, as we don't take sponsors on this channel and are completely community supported, at least at the time of this video coming out. Whatever you decide to do, I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.